Epicor Compass gives me the ability to see information both in tables but also graphically. Many times a table will show me precise elements of a data series, but many times information will pop more, be more understandable if I can display that in a chart or in a gauge as indicated on this page that is used to manage returns to vendors. Now, you'll notice as I point to the chart area and go to designer view, from the top ribbon I can select chart as one of the 4 view options. And the way the chart appears initially is not necessarily the way that I have to live with. I've got the ability to change the specific profile and, importantly, to save that profile for later use for consistent application of profiles to my various charts. As I right click, you'll find various places that allow you to manipulate or modify the chart, such as the chart type, the three-dimensional display, and the show legend. But all of those are available in the properties menu. So I'm going to go to the properties menu and look through some of the features more commonly used. Now, quite often, as I look at a chart, I may select different chart types depending on the data source. So if I look at specific points of data, I can choose point, lines. To smooth that out, I may see a spline or potentially a bar graph to show rows, or a column to show columns. Through that and through the chart area, I have more ability to change that. Now, very often, 3D effect is used in a chart to give the chart more depth. Now, as I've displayed or undisplayed the 3D, you'll see the chart get more depth or flatten. And I can change the 3D aspects if by modifying the parameters indicated below. Right now, I'll leave that in 2 dimensions. I very well may want to add a specific title to a chart or a specific legend. Here I've got more ability to display or not display a legend. For example, my legend includes point of sale defective units versus return units to vendor. And I can either show those or not show those. If I don't show those, I may need to indicate that on my X and Y axis a little more specifically what is included. So I'm going to go and display the legend. I can further change the data elements. Very often, the labels will be used to show the specific numbers associated with a column. And again, I have the ability to modify what's on the axis, including the number of characters in the label. So here I have months indicated along the x-axis, and you'll notice that I'm using 3 characters to chop down the width. I'll just bring that to 4 for the moment. You'll see that that gives me 4 characters. I'm going to chop that back down to 3 just to be a little more readable. And similarly, you'll see that I have a very thick axis lines, very thick lines to just break this up visually a little bit more. I can do the same thing on the y-axis and also indicate titles along the y-axis. Many times I'll use various colors, again, depending on what the data looks like, in order to display different information, and I can choose a custom palette for those colors. Go to good old newness. And finally, I may show different series of data in using different types of charts. So I very well may want to see defective returns in a line and returns to vendors in a bar chart. Again, the idea is to make the information more meaningful by presenting it in the best fashion. Now, as that is chosen, as the column elements are chosen, importantly, I don't want to do that every time. And I also want to be able to come up with a consistent product. So as I have a chart profile that makes sense to me, I want to make sure and save the chart profile. Along with Compass 9.1 includes the ability to save chart profiles along with queries, pages, and layouts and other elements in a folder. So as I enter a folder, I have an ability to specify what the name of that chart is. In this case, I will call operations management default. And this chart then, this profile can be applied to all my other charts, giving me a consistent look. Now, very similar to charts, I also have the ability to show data in gauges. Now, with a gauge, the important consideration is that there would be fewer data elements and fewer data points, or a single series rather, whenever I specify a gauge. Now, similarly to the charts, I've got the ability to change the profiles under the right-click Profiles menu, Properties menu. Not as many options, but let's look at some of the options I use more often. So very often I'll use a radial dial. If I want to use something that looks more like a thermometer, I may indicate a vertical gauge or a horizontal gauge. Or for that early 80s feel, how about a digital panel? Very mod. All right, properties. Let's go back to radial, like radial. Similarly, I may want to show the information on one gauge or multiple gauges. I really like to use a single gauge. It gives me better vision into the data very often, but whatever makes sense for the application is what it makes sense for the application is what's right. So you'll see in this piece I have the different return vendors, return clerks indicated relative to their individual performance. Going back to gauge properties. Similarly, I may set the scale and the scale of the range, and I also can change the title of the gauge. This will display more often if I show the gauge on a single gauge. I'll see the title. If not, if I see by clerk, if I'm showing an individual gauge or separate gauges, I will want to see the individual labels for the data points. So similarly to properties for charts, I also can save properties for gauges and apply those consistently. So the bottom line relative to charts and gauges is I may want to use a chart or gauge to display information in a more visual way than a table can supply. When I do that, I can use the tools that are available under the Properties menu to format what the gauge or chart looks like, and importantly, to save the profiles so I can apply those consistently across the various dashboards I use in the enterprise.